Sweet. Welcome back to another re-recording of a conference presentation. This time FMX 2024. So I would say let's get ready and sit back as if, like always, you were sitting in the audience. Enjoy. All right. Storytelling and atmospheres for games and Hollywood visual effects. Your 3D world is an actor. Let's dive in. Just briefly, let's go through the agenda. So we're going to have the intro, just a brief introduction also of urban. Then one of the main topics, craftsmanship and challenges. Second one, architecture in 3D environments. And then the third one, storytelling. Before we are going to basically wrap it up with the outro and a quick Q&A, which we will not have this time because it's not live. Sweet. So for those that don't know me, my name is Matthias Bühler and I am the founder and CTO of the company called Urban. And at the moment we are 13 people. So this is in 2024, mid-2024. So very soon we're actually going to be 15. Sweet. And my background is in classic architecture. Now, my first steps in 3D graphics were about 1992, so quite some time ago. And altogether, I've been becoming a specialist in procedural modeling, specifically in procedural urban modeling, over the last 15 years approximately. And this is specifically in a tool called City Engine. And what this is, if you don't know it yet, we are going to talk briefly about it in a few minutes. Then also, because the FMX context of the conference is the visual effects industry mainly, I just also wanted to address that there's a Gnomon Workshop tutorial available that I made a couple of years back. So I'm a Gnomon Workshop instructor also. And then last but not least, I've been working in the field of visual effects a couple of years back at Scanline Visual Effects in Vancouver. All right, let's start with Urban. So Urban is my own company, and what we are doing is we are specializing in 3D architecture and 3D environments as basically a specialization or a niche. Now, the company is structured in two business units. One of them is Urban Solutions, that creates, as the name implies, solutions. And the second one is Urban Studios, that is mainly focusing on the creation of off-the-shelf 3D buildings and 3D assets. Let's have a look at a few examples. So this is obviously for solutions now, where we are helping one of our clients, the city of Zurich, with multiple things that are related in the field of procedural modeling, namely in this case, the historic reconstructions, where we help the client in certain consulting aspects of, let's say, data preparation and creative or optimization of creative 3D models and the creation thereof using procedural modeling. But also, for example, then taking the OpenGIS data, which is produced and available on a data portal called Zurich 4D, to basically be able to visualize this data set then with this rendered animation of Zurich in the year 1800. Then another example that we created actually together with the Ideal Spaces Working Group. This is a project of a fictional city called Utopian Disruption, and it's about let's say this fictional ideal structure of a city that could grow and grow from small elements with like parks and squares and plazas and so on, but also continuously grow to a much larger scope or geographic extent. So this is a really interesting project we did together with our friends at the Ideal Spaces Working Group. Then on the Urban Studio side, here you see just a quick screenshot of how this looks on our shop, vrbn.io/shop. There we have many 3D buildings and assets, as you see displayed here with this preview. But then taking some of those assets, we're creating some visualizations like this one here, using, for example, the cranes, and at the bottom left you see this huge like gas bowl or the other containers back here. So just creating multiple types of visualizations. Here are some other assets. Everything here is also visualized in the Unreal game engine. So the content is also available for Unreal Engine next to other so-called platforms. Then the actual specialization that is really the technical stuff is the creation of the off-the-shelf 3D buildings. So here's a beautiful example of that is also sporting kind of a few of our buildings and then ray traced in Unreal Engine. Another example here also of one of our larger 3D environments that we created specifically to also show off some of those buildings. Another example here, so these landscapes can also grow a little bit bigger in geographic size, but again, still everything completely fictional here. And another example, basically by night, where some of our artists created the layout, placed the cameras, and then also went in and very strategically placed a couple of lights to mimic the night mood and give some indirect lighting for a vibrant city at night. Sweet, so that was it about Urban. Let's dive into the main presentation materials. Let's talk about the craftsmanship and challenges in the production of 3D architecture and 3D environments for fictional worlds. All right, let's go back to, or in architectural history, let's talk about Vitruvius. So Vitruvius is one of the kind of very first authors of historically relevant architectural literature. And so he wrote these very famous 10 books of architecture called the Architectura. Now, he basically explains in Latin, obviously, these three basic principles of architecture called venustas, utilitas, and firmitas. And today this is known as the Vitruvian triad. What does it mean? So venustas means beauty. So architecture needs to be beautiful. Utilitas means utility, so it needs to serve a specific purpose. And then firmitas, as you may have guessed, based on the word firm, so it has to be durable. So this is a really kind of interesting dynamic between all of those elements. And so basically the rest of, or the books are going into all of the details why this is the case. And one of the most important aspects of all of those elements, or of the architectural discourse, are the 5 column types that he's describing. Here we see one of the pictures of from the book. And so there are these 5 types of orders. So there's the Tuscan order, the leftmost, then the Doric one, the Ionic one, the Corinthian one, and then the composite. Now, all of them, obviously, as we see, have different proportions, different base heights, different forms of the capitals, and they are all you can look at it as a scientific expression of beauty and proportion. And so all of these things are like, he's going into all of those details to actually note down why these things are aesthetic. And then all of these things much later in the Renaissance, so around the year 1400, this was picked up. It's because, or let me explain the word Renaissance. It's Renaissance comes from the word rebirth. So it was the rebirth or the finding of the old Greek ideals in architecture, and these examples here are basically all going back to those original Greek ideals that, for example, Vitruvius had explained and written down in these 10 books. So what we see here is in Santa Maria Novella by Alberti is that for this church facade, he's actually going back and trying to find in the design the mathematical base principle of rooting the beauty, for example, in all of those architectural proportions and forms. So there's this mathematical approach of basically expressing beauty through symmetry and proportions, kind of, again, going back all the way to the old Greeks and the old temples as the ideal of architecture. Now, there's a very famous quote by Alberti, and it is the following. Beauty is that reasoned harmony of all the parts within a body, so that nothing may be added, taken away, or altered, but for the worse. Then another one that is also very famous, going in a similar direction, is those arts which are founded on numbers, geometry, and the other mathematical disciplines have greatness, and in this lies the dignity of architecture. And this is coming from Plato. Sweet. So now kind of going into the 1900s, so early 20th century, and we can see that there's, for example, these two examples of Art Deco, which is an architectural style, which is mostly, let's say built, or a couple of those mid-rise skyscrapers are actually built in, for example, in Chicago in the United States. There are also other locations on the planet where this architectural style is actually used. But it's a beautiful representation of different types of playing with, let's say, volumes, with different types of proportions, with different materials, but to still try and express beauty next to, obviously, also the use case of, let's say, I don't know, it's a bank building, there's apartments and so on and so on. And yeah, just to go and reinterpret the same principles over and over. So this architectural style is called Art Deco. And then another one that is also very, very ornamental is Art Nouveau. So this one is a little bit more dominant, or mostly dominantly available, or actually like constructed, or buildings are constructed in this style in Europe. So the left one is the Tassel House in Brussels, and then the right one is the Avenue Rapp in Paris. Beautiful examples. But because we're talking about creating fictional worlds for entertainment and games, you might actually find now some parallels if you're looking at these two examples here, looking at the Lord of the Rings. So the Elven architecture in Rivendell is obviously very, very much inspired by Art Nouveau, and then Art Deco for the dwarven fortresses in, for example, in Moria. And I found this very, very fascinating to see that certain real world, let's say, impressions are then taken to express something completely different in this fictional world. So storytelling is something that is just really, really important for this is what the whole presentation is about, right? So storytelling and knowing kind of the architectural histories, but not take the architectural styles that we have in the real world, but kind of take the principles and rearrange the bits and things and the pieces to create something that lives or can live in this fictional world. The principles are the same, but you cannot just borrow and plug in. You need to reinterpret. All right. Now, talking about some more of the challenges is because we're dealing with a great deal of computer graphics engineering in this context of creating architecture and creating three-dimensional environments is, for example, the optimization for game engines, where you have to optimize much, much more meanwhile, or still today, so that you can actually take your large, let's say 3D cities or 3D environments and display them in real time. So this optimization is very, very technical. It takes a long time to actually develop those techniques and technologies. But then once you have the content available, then you can go in this direction of, for example, the virtual production, which you may have seen, especially in the context a couple of years back of the Mandalorian, which is basically a kind of sub-franchise of the Star Wars universe, where these real-time technologies were actually used in quite a pioneering way. So this is a super, super interesting approach for optimizing the speed of film production and especially also TV productions. So this whole notion of taking the real-time production capabilities into, and making things faster for production, also more intuitive for actors because they see the environment that they are standing in, basically, and not just have a pure green screen in the background. This is really, really opening up a lot of new types of working more efficiently. But again, the engineering needs to be solved for these things to work in real time. So this is one of the big challenges that we are also trying to address in our own work. Another one of those, or one of the examples of this optimization to make things work in real time is this so-called parallax occlusion technology. What you see here in this short video snippet is that this polygon here, or this facade wall, has zero thickness. You can see it at the beginning here. There's basically nothing behind this one single polygon, but still there seems to be an interior. There seems to be a room behind this one polygon, or behind the window. Well, this is a mathematical effect that is basically just a very, very smart material trick that is taking a cube or a distorted cube, unwraps it into flat textures, and then based on where the pixels are in screen space and the camera direction and the UV coordinates, this texture lookup then will find the correct pixels on the flat map and displays it so that the perspective actually looks like a three-dimensional effect. And so why did we try and tackle this with our 3D buildings is that because it's just texture-based, you can actually optimize all the geometries of everything that you have on the inside, like the beds and the frames and the lights and the chairs and all of those things that should be 3D objects. You can basically flatten this all down to textures, and with that you can save a lot of resources. Now, this is a lot of work to develop. And here are some examples of scenes that we created or to be able to create some of those or those interiors, and thus this effect of the parallax occlusion effect. And here you see some examples of different sized rooms, differently themed rooms, and all together my team created about 850 different rooms, completely laid out, from which we then were able to derive those textures for the parallax occlusion effect. Some more examples here, some fantastic layout work by the artists. And then the final product, once everything was updated and implemented and the tools updated with for these new types of materials. Here's an example of kind of a downtown skyscraper scene, where if you look very closely, you can see all of the lights at the ceiling, the reflections of the lights on the walls and all of those aspects. But it is, nevertheless, it is just a effect. It's just a mathematical effect. There's nothing actually behind those glasses, those window glasses. Just a brief video of how this looks in action. So this is a short video which we recorded in the Unity game engine. You see also all of those little details, that there are some floors that have these blinds that are kind of half down, as you would find this in reality. And all of this engineering that goes into this realism is just making it, or it's, yeah, just all of these efforts just help with selling the buildings very, very realistically. Now, to give you a sense for the complexity of how much work goes into all of those, or into just this system that we developed for creating these parallax occlusion interiors, is that approximately on average, 5 people were working on this for about 1.5 years, until we had the tools in place, until the interiors were made, until we were able to figure out how to create these textures, how to solve the math behind this mathematical effect, so that the effect also works with the same textures in different coordinate systems, because the different 3D tools have different coordinate systems. That the same thing also works for offline rendering, kind of high quality ray tracing, as also for game engines. All of those aspects, or updating also all of the internal tools, is just an incredible amount of engineering and tinkering and exploring that goes into these things. All right, let's talk a little bit about management, because management of creative projects is also a challenge. So what we are seeing here is the so-called management triangle, and let me briefly explain it to you if you don't know it already. So every project that you're tackling can be done kind of in these 3 different ways. So it can be either good, cheap, or fast. So you can always pick 2. So you can say, I want it to be good and fast, but then it will not be cheap. Or you can say it has to be done cheap and fast, but because of that, it cannot be good, right? And clients always want to have all 3 together, but this is impossible, right? One of these dimensions always has to be, you could say, sacrificed. Or at least you need to find the right balance, right? So this is a really, really important instrument for also kind of in general in business negotiations to really be honest about the parameters of each project, of saying what does need to be good, what does need to be cheap, and what is the time scale. So this is just I just wanted to add this because it's a really, really important chart to keep in mind. And yeah, let me just add this one. Some things, if you want to have the quality like what we had with the parallax occlusion solution, some things cannot be rushed. They just take their time until the quality is right. In certain cases, yes, this may be a luxury, but especially when managing critical things, I guess buffer times and allocating the correct amount of time for certain things is really, really crucial to control these things. All right, let's switch to the second topic, architecture and urban environments. It's getting a little bit scientific here, but bear with me, bear with me. So what we see here is basically just a simple diagram about a so-called beam. If that is just like if you would be holding a pen or something, and then you just have two locations where the beam is actually held vertically, so fighting against gravity, right? Now with this formula, which you see at the bottom here, with this formula, you can compute the amount of distortion you're getting in the middle of this beam. So this value W is computed with Q, which is the actual force that is applied. Then let's go down here, the modulus of elasticity. So this is a property of the actual material that is used of the beam or for the beam. Then I is the moment of inertia. That's a geometric property of the profile of the beam. So you could have an I beam or a T beam or all sorts of different profiles, basically. Now, why am I showing this? So if you're looking at the length L, which is the length of the beam, and then you see, and then you look at this formula here, you see there's L to the power of 3. And then you see W on this side here. So what this means, if you say you are going to double the length of the beam, then 2 to the power of 3, that's a factor of 8. The distortion in the middle is increased by a factor of 8. So that's pretty massive. Even though that you just have twice the length, the distortion in the middle is 8 times as much as before. And now something that is, or it's basically, I would like to address these facts that weight and gravity actually influences the constructions and influences how buildings are formulated, how they are designed to either hide these things, like the formulas, and hide the construction to deal with gravity and earthquakes and all of those things. And in certain cases, you actually want to specifically show these constructions in these proportions and the beauty and the design on facades, for example. Now, in this example here, you see that there are these huge, gigantic pillars here that hold 3 floors of basically construction. Now this is not a standard beam, but this is a slightly different construction where you have a beam basically touching, or there's a column in the middle and the beam goes to the side. But what's really fundamentally beautifully, or what is beautifully shown here, is the fact that these 3 floors here, they act like a support beam. And because of that, because of these constructions, especially for skyscrapers, can be so enormously high, we've seen the to the power of 3 before, that you need to have 3 entire floors to actually be able to support all of the weight above. And this is now shown specifically in the facade. So there are no windows here. Now, this doesn't mean that everything here is completely filled, for example, with concrete. Not necessarily, but there may be different types of constructions like gigantic beams and diagonals and steel constructions and so on. But it's actually deliberately shown by the architect that there's something going on that holds the weight. And so just this little notion of that there's no glass actually is a direct reflection on gravity, and because of gravity, the following construction. So I think this is really, really important. And then going back to our main topic of storytelling, these are now the elements that are really showing in your designs. So these are things that sell a notion of how strong is the gravity in the world that you are creating. So let's say you are on the moon or on some other planet where gravity might be a lot less, then you don't want to show these types of constructions. While on other planets where you have, I don't know, 10 times the amount of gravity, and humans would never be able to survive, for example, but an alien species, they might have like incredibly thick types of constructions to deal with the same aspect of gravity and construction. So really asking questions about what is the world really like? What is, for example, the gravity? Are there like seismic tremors, or are there earthquakes, or whatever, and on that planet, and how would it influence architecture, is something that is very, very important for selling the story. Because of that, architecture becomes an actor that helps you telling the story. Now, just a little detail, because we just mentioned that if you have a beam under gravity, it will actually bend downwards naturally. Now, if you're looking at this construction here, you don't want to have anything that is really bending downwards, right? Because the design wants to have super nice and straight lines. So what architects are using is, for example, precast or pre-bent constructions that eventually, when you're adding floor after floor after floor after floor, eventually will converge to the beam under full tension, being exactly horizontal. It's a beautiful little example of how far architects really go in dealing with these constructions, while still being in control of the final design and the beauty of the final construction. Playing with gravity, but sometimes showing it and sometimes hiding it. I think this is super fascinating. Then another really, really nice example is also that let's say every 20th floor on certain high-rise buildings, you see these elements here that are basically just, you could say, empty floors or technical floors. And in this case, they are about 3 floors high. So what's going on here? So all of these dark elements, they're actually just vents. So there's like wind can blow through all of these floors here. And what's behind these vents is that there are incredibly large machines for cooling, for heating, for water purification, whatever is necessary to actually support all of the other floors. With water, with ventilation, with all of those things, because it's, for example, also physically impossible to create a water pump that pumps, let's say, just water from the ground floor directly to the tip of a roof of a skyscraper. It's physically impossible to produce this. So there are all of these stages for the for the maintenance and for for a skyscraper to be actively used, that are every couple of floors. Now, if these things are missing, if you just say you're just continuing with all of the windows and you have zero notion of these technical floors, then it just might look a little bit off, and it's really hard to pinpoint what it is that is actually missing if you're not very aware of the fact that very large buildings actually need these structural elements or for the maintenance of the building. So yeah, also these elements, they are helping to tell the story of the world that you're creating. So don't forget them. Nice. Now I just added this little piece here also, this little example of something that is completely hidden from the outside. And so the example is the Taipei 101 in Taiwan. And what's actually happening here is, so Taiwan has a lot of earthquakes, very strong earthquakes. And what's happening approximately up here in the building, completely hidden, obviously, we don't see it, but there's this little weight. You see the size of actual human beings. And so this steel ball, it has a weight of 660 tons. So that's about 500 cars or something like that. And it acts as a mass that helps stabilize the top of the building during earthquakes. Because this mass is so solid or so, let's say, massive, it doesn't want to move. And it is able to stabilize the top of the building and avoid that the top starts actually shaking. So it's a technical marvel and just a really, really impressive example for lay people to basically understand how far architecture actually needs to go so that buildings like these can actually work and can be built in reality. So the amount of engineering that goes into buildings like these are unfathomable, right? So really, really interesting example. Cool. And then going back to let's say the creative industries, I would highly recommend to look into books of set design, actual literal set design of the blueprint. So for example, I have these two books here. One is the Harry Potter set books. The other one here is from Star Wars, like the original film sets. And it's just fantastic to see what the dimensions are to go in and say, like, how big are these little rooms and so on. It's just incredibly nice to see how far the architecture and the planning goes to sell the world and to sell the scale of everything, even though the film set just show a very small portion of the world. Sweet. Now, just briefly talking about City Engine. So City Engine is a tool we are heavily using in-house here at Urban, and it is a so-called procedural modeling application that works with procedural rules written in CGA. That's a shape grammar, you could say scripting or programming language, with which you can create, for example, as we see here, urban layouts. And what we see here is the distribution of some of the buildings that we have on our shop, but then the rest of the streets are the streets and the, let's say, the parks and all of those things. They are procedurally recreated while the buildings are just instantiated. So this is how the tool basically fundamentally works once you have all of the rules and all of the content available. And to break this down a little bit further, how or which types of these rules we actually have or are developing and continuing to develop in-house. So we have some industrial rules for industrial areas of a city, residential, commercial, and then downtown where the skyscrapers are. Obviously, in addition to that, also the whole streetscape with the different line markings and like medians and all of those things. Then once you have created a layout with the streets, with the different subdivisions of the city blocks and so on, you can actually go in and assign some of those rules to the different parts. You can also go down to the individual plot or the individual parcel and start reassigning some of those rules that we just saw a few seconds ago, and then have everything generated. And this looks approximately like this as a preview within City Engine. And then from there, you can basically go to all of the 3D tools by exporting the data and loading it there. Here's another example of the layout, just a rough layout created in City Engine. The right one is the preview without the detailed trees, just this indication of a proxy geometry of where the trees are. And the cars, for example, that are placed are just little white boxes, things like that. And then if you take the green sketched area there and export it, so we've invested quite some time in creating an exporter that goes ultimately to Unreal, so export and then import into Unreal. And here's this little section. Let's go back. This little section here, and then this is the import in Unreal. So this is just simply unprocessed, not really nice visualization, but this was some time ago. Cool. Let's talk about stories. Now, in the creative industries, everything that we're doing goes back to telling a story. There's nothing more important than really telling a story, and hopefully tell a good story. Right? So all the aspects, they have to come together and consistently tell the same story. And so we're spending quite some time at the moment in taking some of our content and just create images that look very interesting and that actually themselves are telling stories, like this image here. Technically it's a simple image, but it's still, there's a certain strength to the story that is told. So I really like this image. Yeah, then also storytelling in the sense of storyboards is something that we're doing more and more, because now we have a lot of tools and content, so we can start creating more animations. That's something I'll just briefly address right afterwards again. So that is something that is a classic tool of storyboarding, that is really important for story building. Because while you are building the story, you can then go in and adapt the layout to support your story. Cool. Yes, I like this one. So you may know the movie Dread. I think it was released approximately 2012 or 2013. Super gruesome movie, but it's a fantastic dystopian movie. And why I wanted to show this picture of, or I've actually shown it multiple times in international presentations, is that it's a fantastic example of why is city building and specifically designing larger environments so challenging. Because what are the elements that are telling scale, for example, and mood? So this is a really sad world that we see here. It's dystopian. It's a very bad future. And we see these absolute massive mega blocks with about approximately 200 floors. And we see this like poisonous atmosphere with heavy smoke and both smoke and smog. That has these, like, you see the yellow greenish tones in the color, and also the fact that, well, what happens to the people that are living down here in the shade or in the shadow of these massive buildings that might probably never see a direct sun ray, basically, right? It's really kind of disastrous for people to live in these locations down here. And so looking at images like these, or if you're also looking at kind of the grime and the wear and tear of all of those buildings, going into these images or sketches and try to figure out how would the people live, what does it mean to live there, and how would nature and all of those toxic fumes and so on, how would they influence the lifestyle of the population. And so this image here is such a wonderful little indicator of storytelling, right? Because it gives you a really meaningful visual insight in how sad this world really is, which is obviously a very big part of the plot. So I can highly recommend to especially study dystopian movies, because they are really strong in actually these aspects of storytelling, or especially the environments. I mean, Blade Runner, exactly the same thing, where you can learn a lot about the structure of environments and storytelling. The same thing also with weather and those things, but we'll jump into this in a minute. All right. Cool. Actually, yeah, here we are. Right. So taking an environment and then showing it in different atmospheric conditions, let's say nice sunset, cloudy, fluffy sky, and let's say after the rain, or then foggy fall, bad weather, like this, completely different atmospheres without changing anything, but it gives you a completely different impression of the environment. And this is where, let's say, directors or art directors for games, or movie directors telling the stories, are very specifically instrumentalizing these things as to compose the story, like an orchestra, right? So all of those elements are incredibly important to master, based on with colors, with saturation of the sky blues, with the fluffiness of the clouds. Are they dominant? Are they very light? And so on and so on. Super important elements of storytelling. Another aspect that is very often also left aside is just picking the right camera angles to tell something. So you're instrumentalizing the environment and showing it, making the architecture point you towards the action, or point you visually, guiding you towards where you are supposed to look, or where the audience, for example, of a movie is supposed to look. And it's a very simple element, but it's really important for storytelling. Another example here that my artists made, also with how much fog do you have? How saturated is the fog? Which color does the fog have? And you see these kind of the colors that are fighting each other, the complement. They are, in German it's called Komplementärfarbe. I'm not sure how this is translated into English, but kind of if you look at the color spectrum, orange is exactly the opposite of blue. So this is something that is very deliberately added here in the warm tones versus the blue, the cool or almost cold tones. Very deliberately used here by my artists to tell this story. Sweet. Coming back again to why real-time technologies are becoming so interesting for storytelling, or whether it is in the early stages of just on the concept stage, or conceptual stage of creating environments, or for drafting or creating just, or brainstorming ideas of storytelling through environments. And so you could come up with an industrial park like this, for example, and then just wonder, well, at the moment, yeah, it looks nice, fluffy clouds, and there's a little bit of a sunset mood going on. But how would this actually look if it were raining? Well, now you can choose that, right? You can, using game engines, or in our implementation of what we did here, we have this weather system, and you can actually go in and just say, yeah, time of day change, change the weather settings, and then you can say, okay, it's completely different mood than when it was with nice weather we had just a few seconds ago. But then obviously you can also go a little bit further and say, how would everything look in snow? I just find this incredibly fascinating to have these tools available meanwhile, and to be able to just switch a few things up and have a completely, you could say, completely different three-dimensional world. Cool. Storytelling again. This is also a preview made in City Engine. This is actually created by one of my software developers, and he basically layouted the whole city here with a diameter of approximately 8 kilometers. That's about approximately 6 miles. And this sketch is basically just a super rough sketch where he said, okay, this is going to be the starting position for a helicopter flight. Then it's going to follow this direction and go all the way back and land on this building here in the background. Now, because this video is not 100% finished yet, I'm just going to show you one single frame from this movie, and this is how it looks. So this is a real-time recording made in Unreal, kind of played actually with a gamepad, kind of driving the helicopter or flying the helicopter. And so by the date, or now we are in early May 2024, so in a week or two, we should be able to have this released as an actual video. So bear with me until this is released. Sweet. This was basically the main part, so just going towards the outro, and just a very little pitch of my own podcast, the 3D Environment Podcast. You can find the episode either on YouTube or on Spotify and the other podcast platforms, but you can also find it on my own website, matthiasbühler.com. You find also all the details about the podcast there. Then also another brief shout out to the ICE conference. www.ice.art is a conference specifically about 3D environments that I'm co-organizing together with my friend Thomas Gronert. And the next one that we are going to hold, officially at least, of the known date will be 1st and 2nd of October 2024. We might actually add another event somewhere in between in collaboration also with some partners, but we will see. So if you're interested in 3D environments in general, this is definitely something to keep an eye on. And so all of the recordings, or most of the recordings that we're able to make from the last conference are also available through the website, and then jumping over to the YouTube channel. Some videos, sadly, we were not able to put on YouTube because of copyright details and legal details. But so to make sure that you get everything, just actually register for the conference. Sweet. Then, because FMX was just a few days ago, the FMX special sale of 24% is actually still going on for a couple more days, so approximately to the 10th or 11th of May 2024. So hurry up and get some 3D buildings. So also, by the way, all of the buildings you see in this image were made with these, or with our 3D buildings. Sweet. Then also here at the actual FMX presentation, I showed a quick video teaser of something that goes in this direction with a, let's say, cars racing in a city. I showed a video, but also this one is not yet perfectly finished. So I want to wait another 1, 2, 3 weeks until it's perfect, and then we are going to release it to the public. So stay tuned also for this one. All right, there's not going to be a Q&A now, but this has been it. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation that I held at the FMX 2024. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I would say see you next time. Have a great day. Cheers.